Hey everyone, Dusty here, and today I wanted to explain heart rate training and more specifically the zones that go along with heart rate training. So zone just essentially means that you're training in a specific percentage of your threshold heart rate. And for the purpose of this video and what I use in my training, we're going to use the Coggin training zones. He's definitely one of the experts when it comes to power and heart rate training zones. And I've used the zones that he's set up for cycling to really help me benefit in my training and racing, both in cycling and running. So first up, you have to know what your threshold heart rate is. And essentially what threshold heart rate means is the maximal effort that your body can sustain while still being able to remove the lactic acid that's being used by your muscles. And once you go over your threshold, you're going to have to stop or slow down so that your body can flush that out. So to find out your threshold heart rate, do a 30-minute time trial. You can do it on the bike or on the run. So you're giving your maximal effort that you can sustain for that 30-minute window. Make sure you don't start out too hard either. Now when you get to the last 20 minutes, press lap, and whatever your average heart rate was in that last 20 minutes of the 30-minute time trial, that's your threshold heart rate, more or less. So alright, so let's get into it and I'll explain the 5 training zones. Alright, so zone 1 is a very, very easy effort. It's kind of an active recovery zone. Now, I don't spend a lot of time in zone 1. Usually if I'm just spinning my legs out, maybe after a hard run or during certain bits of my warm-up and my cool down, I'll go down to zone 1. But other than that, you're not getting a huge benefit from spending a lot of time in zone 1 just because it is so easy. Effort-wise, if you're looking at zone 1, you should be able to hold a conversation, no problem at all. Alright, now zone 2, that's the endurance zone, that's the fat burning zone, and that's where you're probably going to want to be spending 75 to 85% of the bulk of your training. Still a fairly easy effort to hold, and you should be able to maintain a conversation in zone 2 as well. It's a harder zone than zone 1, but by no means is it a hard zone. This is just building up the base, building up your aerobic engine, and zone 2 is, like I said, where you should be spending most of your time. Now zone 3. Zone 3 is where I bet a lot of people I know, especially runners, spend the majority of their time, and I would recommend that you spend hardly any time in zone 3. So zone 3 is kind of known as a tempo zone and also as a gray zone. Basically, training in zone 3, you're going to be not going easy enough to get the benefits of an easy workout, and you're certainly not going hard enough to get the benefits of a hard workout. So a lot of people recommend that you just don't spend any time in zone 3. And I would say for most of you watching, that's probably really, really good advice. I bet a lot of you are spending a lot of time in zone 3. So next time you have an easy workout, go a lot easier than zone 3. Keep it in zone 1 or 2. And when you have to go harder, make sure it's harder than zone 3. Alright, zone 4. Also known as the race pace zone or threshold zone. Essentially you're holding your threshold heart rate. So conversation is going to be nil during this zone. You might be able to get out 1 or 2 words effort-wise. But essentially you're training right at that threshold level and it's going to be very hard. And usually when you're doing some harder intervals, it's going to be in this zone. So anywhere from probably 10 to 30 minutes, maybe even slightly less or maybe even slightly longer. This sort of training is important if you want to raise your threshold and get faster. And the last zone that we're going to look at is zone 5, and this is known as the VO2 Max Training zone. Basically, it's very, very hard efforts. You'll be training at a heart rate that's higher than your threshold, so something that you're not going to be able to maintain for very long before your body has to stop or slow down. And this generally is where you'll do intervals anywhere from probably about 1 to 5 minutes. A lot of training in this zone would be classified as speed work. But in the overall picture of an overall training schedule, you won't be spending a lot of time in zone 5. So that's a pretty brief explanation of the 5 training zones for heart rate. Remember, like I said, the bulk of your training is going to be in zone 1 and 2. I would avoid zone 3 as much as possible. and then you can make some gains training in zone 4 quite a bit, and then you can do some zone 5 work as well for speed work. Now it's nice to know what these training zones mean, but if you want a little bit more information, just do a Google search or reach out to a coach or message myself. And if you just want to know how you can use these zones in your training, you might think, oh, I should spend most of my time in zone 2, but when do I use zone 4? When do I go to zone 5? Should I ever use zone 3? These sort of questions can be pretty confusing if you're just getting started or you don't know much about heart rate zone training. But training with a heart rate monitor and going off a zone can be really beneficial. Like I said, I know a lot of people who train in zone 3 when they're not training easy enough. They're not training in zone 2 to get that aerobic benefit that they're lacking, or they're not training hard enough, so they're not going to zone 4 and 5 to really get those speed benefits of training at a higher heart rate. For me personally, I like using my heart rate monitor for easy workouts. When I'm feeling really good in training, a lot of times I'll throw on my heart rate strap just to hold me back, just to make sure I'm not creeping up into zone 3 and 4, and just that I'm really maintaining zone 2, staying in that aerobic zone for the entire session. Now there are things that can affect your heart rate. It can be things like dehydration, the altitude you're training at, if you have a lot of stress in your life, and also just how hot it is outside. So all of those factors affect your heart rate essentially. If you are dealing with any of those, like dehydration, or you're training or racing at a higher altitude, your heart rate's going to be a lot higher than it is normally. And that doesn't mean that you can just muscle your way through that. You have to dial down the effort if your heart rate is saying that it's too high. I hope that sheds a little bit of light on heart rate zone training and doesn't confuse you too much. And if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more everything running, triathlon, and nutrition related.